Some people lose their fortune overnight. Others lose something far more dangerous, the reason to keep going. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the private recovery suite on the 28th floor of Blackwood Medical Center. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a cold November rain. Yellow taxi lights crawled through the streets nearly 300 feet below like tiny sparks moving through darkness. Inside the room, everything was silent except for the machines and the soft hum of the city beyond the glass. Ethan Blackwood stared at the skyline without blinking. At 42 years old, he was worth more than $3 billion. Financial magazines called him a visionary. Business channels called him a legend. Investors called him a genius. But none of those people were sitting in this room tonight. None of them had visited in weeks. None of them answered his calls anymore. His wheelchair rested beside the window. The expensive suit jackets were gone. The interviews were gone. The board meetings were gone. The future he had planned was gone. 6 months earlier, a helicopter accident had changed everything. The headlines lasted for days. The sympathy lasted for weeks. The loyalty lasted even less. Ethan tightened his jaw as rain tapped against the glass. He remembered the visitors at the beginning. Friends promising they would always be there. Business partners promising support. Family members promising patience. One by one, every promise had disappeared. Some became too busy. Some stopped calling. Some simply vanished. Even Victoria, the woman who had once spoken about growing old beside him, had quietly walked away from the life they were supposed to build together. The city had moved on. Everyone had moved on. Everyone except him. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Ethan hated that sound. It reminded him that he was still here. Still trapped. Still waking up every morning to the same reality. His hand moved to the wheel of the chair. Slowly, he pushed forward. The chair rolled across the polished floor. The lights of Manhattan reflected in the glass ahead of him. The rain made the city look distant, almost unreal. Another push. Another foot closer. He stopped only inches from the window. For a long moment, he stared at his reflection. The man looking back hardly resembled the billionaire who once stood on magazine covers. His shoulders seemed heavier. His eyes looked older. Tired. Empty. The room door opened behind him. Ethan didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Another nurse. Another professional smile. Another person who would eventually leave like everyone else. He was already preparing the words. Leave me alone. But before he could speak, a calm female voice broke through the silence. You don't get to give up before I tell you something. Ethan frowned. Most nurses apologized when he was rude. Most avoided eye contact. Most lasted less than 2 weeks. This one sounded different. He slowly turned his chair. Standing near the doorway was a woman wearing navy blue scrubs and carrying a patient chart under one arm. She looked to be in her late 20s. Blonde hair pulled neatly back. Clear blue eyes. No nervous smile. No visible fear. Just quiet confidence. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Who are you? The woman stepped forward and placed the chart on the counter beside the wall. Olivia Carter, she said. I'm your new nurse. Ethan let out a cold laugh. You won't last a week. Olivia looked directly at him. Then she said something no one else had dared to say. Good thing I'm not planning to leave. Ethan stared at her for several seconds, waiting for the familiar signs. The hesitation. The discomfort. The nervous attempt to make conversation. Instead, Olivia Carter simply walked toward the coffee machine in the corner of the suite, poured herself a cup, and sat down as if she belonged there. The rain continued tapping against the windows. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Ethan almost laughed. Almost. You should leave while you still can, he said. Olivia took a sip of coffee. That sounds more like advice than a threat. Ethan felt irritation rise immediately. Most people avoided challenging him. Even before the accident, few had the courage. Money had a strange way of making people agreeable. You do not know who I am. Olivia glanced at the framed magazine cover sitting on a shelf nearby. Ethan Blackwood, Innovator of the Year. 40 under 40. The face that once appeared on financial networks every week. I know exactly who you are, she replied. You are a patient who skipped physical therapy twice this week. For the first time in days, Ethan was speechless. Olivia returned to her chart. The silence stretched between them. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere above the city. Ethan turned back toward the window. He hated how calm she seemed. He hated that she was not impressed. Most of all, he hated that she appeared completely unaffected by his attitude. 3 floors below, the hospital parking garage glowed beneath rows of white lights. Cars arrived. Cars left. People continued living their lives. Ethan remembered when his own schedule had been measured in minutes. Private flights. Investor meetings. Product launches. Every hour filled. Every second valuable. Now entire days passed without purpose. Sometimes he would stare at the same wall for an hour before realizing how much time had disappeared. The accident had taken more than mobility. It had stolen momentum. Identity. Direction. 6 months earlier, Ethan had been preparing the largest acquisition in company history. Blackwood Technologies was about to expand into international markets. Analysts predicted another $1 billion in growth. Then one stormy evening changed everything. The helicopter experienced mechanical failure during a routine flight. Ethan remembered the sound first. Then the shaking. Then darkness. When he woke up, he was surrounded by machines. Doctors spoke in careful voices. Family members stood near the bed looking frightened. His legs remained still. Days later came the diagnosis. Recovery uncertain. Timeline unknown. Everything after that felt like a slow disappearance. The board appointed temporary leadership. Investors became nervous. Friends became distant. Victoria visited every day during the first month. Every other day during the second. Once a week during the third. Then not at all. Ethan never asked why. Deep down, he already knew. People loved successful stories. They did not know what to do with unfinished ones. You are thinking about her again. Olivia's voice interrupted the memory. Ethan's head snapped toward her. Excuse me? Victoria. Olivia did not even look up from her notes. Your heart rate increases every time you stare at that engagement photo. Ethan followed her gaze. A silver frame sat on the bookshelf across the room. He had forgotten it was still there. A picture from 2 summers ago. Smiling faces. Bright sunlight. Promises that now felt centuries old. You should not make assumptions, he said coldly. Olivia finally met his eyes. You should not keep souvenirs that make you miserable. Ethan wanted to argue. Wanted to dismiss her. Wanted to tell her she had no idea what she was talking about. Yet the words never came. Because she was right. The photo had become a monument to everything he had lost. Olivia stood and walked toward the shelf. Ethan watched carefully. Most visitors ignored the picture. Some stared awkwardly. Olivia picked it up, studied it for a moment, then handed it to him. Keep it if it helps you move forward, she said quietly. Throw it away if it keeps you stuck. But stop pretending it does not matter. Ethan looked down at the frame resting in his hands. The glass reflected the city lights behind him. For the first time in months, someone had spoken to him without pity, fear, or obligation. And somehow that honesty felt more unsettling than loneliness ever had. Across the room, Olivia gathered her things and headed toward the door. Same time tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan looked up. What if I tell security not to let you in? Olivia smiled slightly. Not a polite smile. Not a nervous smile. A confident one. Then I will see you the day after tomorrow. The door closed softly behind her. The room fell silent again. But for the first time since the accident, the silence felt different. And Ethan could not explain why. The next morning Ethan woke to the sound of rain striking the windows again. Gray clouds hung low over Manhattan, turning the skyline into a watercolor of steel and fog. For a few seconds he remained still, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember why the room felt different. Then he remembered Olivia Carter. The nurse who refused to be intimidated. The nurse who spoke to him as if he were an ordinary man instead of a billionaire surrounded by careful words and cautious smiles. The realization irritated him immediately. By 9 o'clock he had already decided he was not going to make things easy for her. At exactly 9:15, the suite door opened. Olivia stepped inside carrying a tablet and a paper bag from a coffee shop downstairs. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." Ethan folded his arms. "You are late." Olivia glanced at the wall clock. "I am 3 minutes early." Ethan frowned. "Then leave and come back in 3 minutes." Olivia placed the coffee on the counter. "No." Ethan stared at her. "No? No." She sat down and opened the patient chart. "Your blood pressure looks better today." Ethan turned his wheelchair toward the window. "I am not doing therapy." "That is fine." "I am serious." "I know." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You are not going to argue?" "Why would I?" Olivia asked. "You are an adult." Her calm response somehow felt more frustrating than any lecture. For several moments neither of them spoke. The city stretched beyond the glass, alive and moving while Ethan remained trapped in the same room. Finally Olivia stood. "In that case, we can spend the morning reviewing your progress reports." Ethan hated reports. He hated charts. He hated reminders of how far he still had to go. "No, then we can discuss your nutrition plan." "No, or we can work on physical therapy." Ethan looked at her. Olivia smiled. "Interesting how we always end up back there." A few minutes later they arrived in the rehabilitation gym on the 20th floor. Sunlight fought its way through the clouds and spilled across polished floors and exercise equipment. Several patients worked quietly with therapists. Ethan hated coming here. Every machine felt like evidence. Evidence of what he had lost. Olivia rolled his wheelchair beside a set of parallel bars. 5 minutes. No, 4. No, 3. Ethan crossed his arms. Olivia leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Do you know what everyone says about you?" Ethan looked away. "I do not care. They say Ethan Black would never quit anything." The words landed harder than she expected. Because they were true. For 20 years Ethan had built companies, negotiated impossible deals, and overcome obstacles that would have broken most people. Yet here he was surrendering before he even started. Olivia stepped back. "I will make you a deal." Ethan remained silent. "Try for 60 seconds. If you still hate it, I will stop asking today." Around them the gym buzzed with quiet activity. A therapist encouraged an elderly veteran learning to walk again. A young athlete recovering from surgery laughed at something his trainer said. Life moved forward all around him. Ethan looked at the bars. Then at Olivia. Then back at the bars. Slowly he placed his hands on the cold metal. The room seemed quieter suddenly. Even the sounds of the gym faded into the background. He pushed downward. Muscles strained. His shoulders tightened. For one brief second his body rose slightly from the chair. Not standing. Not even close. But higher than yesterday. Higher than last week. Higher than he believed possible. Then he settled back into the seat, breathing harder than he wanted to admit. Olivia did not clap. She did not cheer. She simply nodded once. 60 seconds are over. Ethan stared at her. That was it? That was it. You are not going to give some inspirational speech? Olivia shook her head. No. I am just going to see you tomorrow. For the first time, Ethan almost smiled before he caught himself. And across the gym, unnoticed by both of them, an older therapist watched quietly and whispered to a colleague. That is the first time he has tried in months. 3 days later, the rain was gone. Winter sunlight poured through the windows of Blackwood Medical Center, painting long golden lines across the floor of Ethan's suite. New York looked different under clear skies. Sharper. Brighter. Alive. Ethan sat near the window with a financial newspaper resting unopened on his lap. For the first time in months, he had actually considered reading it. That small fact annoyed him. It felt like evidence that Olivia Carter was slowly changing something he had worked very hard to protect. His isolation. His routine. His certainty that nobody stayed. The suite door opened at exactly 9:15. Olivia stepped inside carrying her tablet and a paper cup of coffee. Ethan noticed something unusual immediately. A silver watch peeked out beneath the sleeve of her navy blue scrub top. He had seen it before, but today the sunlight caught it perfectly. The design looked old. Elegant. Expensive. Not the type of watch most nurses could afford. Olivia followed his gaze and casually adjusted her sleeve. "Good morning." Ethan ignored the greeting. "That watch is unusual." Olivia glanced down. "You noticed?" "Hard not to." She smiled faintly. "Most people never do." Ethan studied it more carefully. Something about it felt familiar. The polished silver case. The dark blue face. The engraved crown. He was almost certain he had seen that model somewhere before. "Family heirloom?" he asked. Olivia hesitated for the first time since meeting him. "Just a second." "Barely noticeable." Then she nodded. "Something like that." Before Ethan could ask another question, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. The expression on her face changed immediately. Not fear. Not panic. Something quieter. Sadness. She declined the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Olivia looked surprised. It was probably the first personal question he had asked her. "Yes," she said. "Just my father." Ethan noticed she did not sound convincing. Later that afternoon, after another therapy session, they found themselves sitting in the hospital cafeteria overlooking the East River. The lunch crowd had mostly disappeared. Sunlight shimmered across the water. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence. Then Olivia finally spoke. "My father used to hate hospitals." Ethan looked up from his coffee. "Used to?" Olivia nodded. "When I was 17, he suffered a spinal injury." Ethan remained still. "What happened?" "Construction accident." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes drifted toward the window. "One normal workday. One unexpected moment. Then everything changed." Ethan understood immediately. Olivia continued. "Before that, he was the strongest person I knew. Afterward, he could barely get out of bed. Not because of the injury. Because of what it did to his mind." The cafeteria noise faded into the background. Ethan listened. "People visited at first," Olivia said quietly. "Neighbors. Friends. Co-workers. Everyone promised they would help." A faint smile appeared on her face. Then life got busy. The calls slowed down. The visits became shorter. Eventually most stopped altogether. Ethan looked away. The story sounded painfully familiar. Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "My father spent 2 years convincing everyone he wanted to be left alone." "Did he?" Ethan asked. "No." Her answer came instantly. "He wanted proof that somebody would stay anyway." The words landed somewhere deep inside him. For a moment neither of them spoke. The sunlight danced across the river beyond the glass. Finally Ethan asked the question that had been forming in his mind since the day they met. "Is that why you became a nurse?" Olivia smiled. A genuine smile this time. "Partly." "And the other part?" She looked down at the silver watch on her wrist. Her fingers brushed the edge of it almost unconsciously. "Because someone helped my family when we needed it most." Ethan followed her gaze to the watch again. That same strange feeling returned. Familiar. Important. almost like a memory standing just beyond reach. Before he could press further, Olivia stood. Come on. Therapy starts in 10 minutes. Ethan watched her walk toward the elevator. For the first time, he realized there were things she was not telling him. And for the first time in months, he found himself wanting answers instead of isolation. That evening a winter storm rolled across Manhattan. By sunset the city had disappeared behind sheets of rain and low clouds. From the 28th floor of Blackwood Medical Center, the world beyond the glass looked like a sea of blurred lights floating in darkness. Ethan sat alone in his suite listening to the weather. Rain tapped against the windows. Wind howled between neighboring towers. Somewhere far below, traffic crawled through the storm. The room felt unusually quiet. Olivia had finished her shift 2 hours earlier. To his annoyance, Ethan noticed the silence felt heavier after she left. He told himself it was nothing. Just another evening. Yet he found himself glancing toward the door more often than usual. Around 8:30, the lights flickered once. Then twice. A moment later the entire floor went dark. The sudden silence was startling. The hum of machines vanished. The overhead lights disappeared. Only emergency backup lighting remained, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hated darkness now. Before the accident, storms had been an inconvenience. Afterward they became reminders. Reminders of uncertainty. Reminders of losing control. The monitor beside his bed switched to battery power and resumed its steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Ethan stared toward the window where lightning flashed somewhere beyond the clouds. The room suddenly felt smaller. Colder. A knock sounded at the door. Before he could answer, Olivia stepped inside carrying a flashlight. Water droplets glistened on her jacket. I knew I would find you awake, she said. Ethan frowned. Your shift ended hours ago. The roads are flooded. Half the staff is stuck downstairs. She set the flashlight on the counter. Looks like I am staying a while. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room. For a brief moment the city appeared beyond the glass, then vanished again into darkness. Olivia pulled a chair beside the window and sat down. Neither spoke for several minutes. The storm filled the silence. Eventually Ethan broke first. Did your father ever recover? Olivia looked surprised by the question. Then she nodded slowly. Not completely. But enough? Enough to laugh again. Ethan stared at the rain. That sounds more important. Olivia smiled softly. It was. The storm intensified outside. Rain hammered against the windows. The city lights flickered in the distance. For reasons he could not explain, Ethan found himself talking. Not about business. Not about investments. Not about the company. About the accident. About waking up in a hospital bed. About the endless weeks afterward. The words came slowly at first. Then, faster. He spoke about watching visitors disappear one by one. About pretending he did not care. About convincing himself isolation was easier than disappointment. Olivia never interrupted. She simply listened. When he finally stopped, the room felt strangely lighter. You know what the worst part was? Ethan asked quietly. Olivia shook her head. Everybody looked at me differently. His reflection stared back from the dark glass. Not like Ethan Blackwood. Not like the person I had been. Just someone broken. The storm rumbled outside. Olivia followed his gaze toward the city. Can I tell you something? Depends. When my father got hurt, everyone focused on what he lost. She folded her hands together. Nobody noticed what stayed the same. Ethan looked at her. Meaning? He was still funny. Still stubborn. Still the person who taught me how to ride a bicycle and balance a checkbook. She smiled at the memory. The injury changed part of his life. It did not erase him. Ethan sat quietly. The words lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. Another flash of lightning reflected across the glass. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan laughed. Not loudly. Not for long. Just a brief laugh. But it was real. Olivia looked at him with surprise. What? Ethan shook his head. Nothing. That sounded like something. Another small smile appeared despite his efforts to suppress it. I was just thinking you are incredibly stubborn. Olivia grinned. I get that a lot. Midnight arrived before the storm finally began to weaken. Emergency power remained active throughout the hospital. The city slowly reappeared beyond the windows. Olivia stood and stretched. Looks like the worst is over. Ethan glanced toward the door. For the first time since they met, he did not want her to leave. The realization caught him completely off guard. Olivia picked up her flashlight and jacket. Try to get some sleep. She reached the doorway before Ethan spoke again. Olivia. She turned. Thank you? The words hung between them. Simple. Honest. Unexpected. Olivia smiled but said nothing. Then she quietly closed the door behind her. Alone again, Ethan looked out at the recovering city. The storm had passed. Yet for the first time in 6 months, he realized something else had changed as well. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped counting the people who left, and started noticing the one person who stayed. The following week brought an energy Ethan had not felt in months. Physical therapy sessions became longer. Conversations with Olivia became easier. The city outside his windows no longer looked like a world he had lost. It looked like a place he might someday return to. On a cold Thursday morning, Ethan completed an entire therapy session without complaining once. The achievement was small, but the staff noticed. Olivia noticed too. That might be a hospital record, she joked as they returned to his suite. Ethan smirked. Do not get used to it. Olivia laughed and stepped toward the coffee machine. At that exact moment, a knock echoed through the room. Neither expected visitors. Ethan frowned. Very few people came anymore. The door opened slowly. The smile disappeared from his face instantly. Victoria Langford stood in the doorway. Elegant as always. Perfectly styled blonde hair. Designer coat. Diamond earrings that caught the sunlight. She looked exactly like the woman in the photograph that had once sat on his bookshelf. For a moment the room became completely silent. Olivia glanced between them. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Not because he missed Victoria. Because her appearance felt strange. Calculated. Unexpected. Ethan, Victoria said softly. You look better. Ethan did not answer. Victoria stepped inside carrying a small gift bag. I heard about your progress. Her voice sounded warm. Concerned. Familiar. Yet something about it felt different now. Like an actor repeating lines from an old script. Olivia quietly gathered her tablet. I should give you two some privacy. Ethan surprised himself by immediately responding. No. Olivia paused. Victoria's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. But Ethan saw it. Olivia remained near the window. Victoria sat down across from Ethan. I have been thinking about you a lot. Ethan looked at her carefully. 6 months ago those words would have meant everything. Today they felt strangely empty. Have you? He asked. Victoria nodded. Of course. Her eyes wandered around the suite. The upgraded furniture. The financial reports stacked on the desk. The tablet displaying market updates. Ethan followed her gaze. Then he remembered something important. 3 days earlier, major business media outlets had reported that Blackwood Technologies was preparing to finalize a multi-billion-dollar international partnership. The company's stock had surged nearly 12% overnight. Suddenly Victoria's visit felt less mysterious. She continued speaking. I know things ended badly. Ethan remained silent. But people make mistakes. Olivia stood near the window pretending not to listen. Yet Ethan noticed her reflection in the glass. Calm. Observant. Watching everything. Victoria leaned forward. Maybe we both needed time. Ethan stared at her. For the first time, he noticed details he had ignored before. The careful choice of words. The rehearsed expressions. The convenient timing. The way she kept mentioning the future without once mentioning the difficult months behind them. "Where were you in August?" Ethan asked suddenly. Victoria blinked. "What?" "Or September." His voice remained calm. "Or October." The room grew quiet. Victoria forced a smile. "Ethan, that is not fair." "No? You know how difficult everything became." Ethan nodded slowly. "I do." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Across the room, Olivia said nothing. Yet her presence felt steady, like an anchor. Ethan realized something unsettling. During his worst days, Victoria had disappeared. During those same days, Olivia had stayed. One came back when success returned. The other never left when success was gone. The difference suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. Victoria stood and adjusted her coat. "Perhaps this is not the right time." Ethan looked out the window toward Manhattan's skyline. "Perhaps." Victoria hesitated, clearly expecting him to stop her. He did not. A few moments later the door closed behind her. Silence returned to the suite. Olivia walked back toward the coffee machine. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Ethan watched the city for a long moment before answering. "I think I just learned something important." Olivia waited. Ethan glanced toward the closed door. "Sometimes people do not come back because they care." His eyes shifted toward Olivia. "Sometimes they come back because they finally see value again." For the first time since Victoria left, a faint shadow crossed Olivia's face. Not surprise. Not satisfaction. Concern. As if she knew a truth Ethan had not discovered yet. And somewhere beneath the sleeve of her navy blue scrubs, the silver watch caught the afternoon sunlight once more. The next morning Ethan could not stop thinking about the look on Olivia's face after Victoria left. It had not been jealousy. It had not been relief. It had been concern. As if she knew a chapter of the story that he had never read. Outside, Manhattan sparkled beneath a bright winter sky. Inside Blackwood Medical Center, the rhythm of recovery continued. Therapy sessions. Medical evaluations. Meetings with specialists. Yet something had shifted. The questions Ethan once ignored now followed him everywhere. Why did Olivia always avoid talking about the silver watch? Why did she seem familiar in a way he could not explain? And why had she looked worried when he finally saw Victoria for who she really was? 2 days later Ethan received a visit from his longtime attorney, Daniel Mercer. The gray-haired lawyer had worked with him for nearly 15 years and knew every chapter of Blackwood Technologies. They spent an hour reviewing company updates and legal documents. Business was improving. Investors were optimistic. The international partnership was moving forward. Everything sounded positive. Yet before leaving, Daniel placed a thin folder on Ethan's desk. "There is something else you should see." Ethan opened the folder. Inside were archived records from the Blackwood Foundation, the charitable organization he created years earlier. Thousands of scholarships. Medical grants. Educational programs. Most had faded from memory. Ethan had never viewed philanthropy as a publicity tool. He simply signed approvals and trusted the foundation to help people who needed it. "Why am I looking at this?" Ethan asked. Daniel adjusted his glasses. "A reporter contacted us yesterday. She is writing a feature about several scholarship recipients whose lives were changed by the foundation." Ethan glanced through the documents. Then he froze. A photograph stared back at him from one of the pages. A teenage girl with bright eyes and blonde hair standing beside an older man in a wheelchair. Ethan's pulse quickened. The older man looked familiar. Very familiar. Beneath the photograph was a name. Olivia Carter. Ethan sat perfectly still. "What is this?" Daniel looked surprised. "One of your scholarship recipients from 12 years ago." Ethan continued reading. The article described a struggling family. A construction worker whose spinal injury had left him unable to work. medical bills, financial hardship. A daughter determined to become a nurse despite overwhelming obstacles. Then came the scholarship. Full tuition assistance. Living expenses. Academic support. The opportunity that changed everything. Ethan stared at the page. His mind drifted back to the cafeteria conversation. My father suffered a spinal injury. Someone helped my family when we needed it most. His eyes moved to the photograph again. Then to the silver watch visible on Olivia's wrist even in the old picture. Suddenly pieces began falling into place. Ethan looked up. Who approved this scholarship? Daniel smiled. You did. The room became silent. I do not remember. That does not surprise me, Daniel said. You approved hundreds. But this one stood out. Ethan frowned. Why? Daniel pointed toward a handwritten note attached to the file. The paper had yellowed with age. Ethan carefully unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to a teenage girl. Dear Mr. Blackwood, I do not know if I will ever meet you, but because of your kindness my father can stop worrying about my future. Someday I want to help people the way you helped us. Thank you for believing in someone you have never met. Olivia Carter. Ethan read the letter twice. Then 3 times. The words blurred slightly as realization settled over him. All this time he believed Olivia stayed because it was her job. He believed she cared because she was compassionate. He never imagined their lives had crossed paths years before. Olivia had not entered his story by accident. Long before the accident. Long before the hospital. Long before the loneliness. Their connection had already begun. Ethan looked toward the window where winter sunlight flooded the room. Somewhere in the building, Olivia was starting another shift. And for the first time, he understood that the person helping him rebuild his life was someone whose life he had unknowingly helped build years ago. When Olivia entered Ethan's suite the next morning, she immediately sensed something had changed. He was sitting beside the window with the scholarship file resting on his lap. Winter sunlight filled the room. Snow flurries drifted between the skyscrapers outside. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Olivia noticed the old photograph partially visible inside the folder, and quietly set her tablet on the counter. You found it, she said. Ethan looked up. You knew I would eventually. Olivia nodded. Daniel called me yesterday. Ethan glanced down at the handwritten letter again. The edges were worn from time. The ink had faded slightly. Yet every word remained clear. Why did you never tell me? He asked. Olivia pulled a chair closer and sat down. Because it was never supposed to be about me. Ethan shook his head slowly. For months I thought you stayed because you were assigned here. A faint smile appeared on Olivia's face. At first I was. And after that? Olivia looked toward the snowy skyline. After that, I stayed because I remembered what it felt like when someone believed in my future before I could see it myself. The room fell quiet. Ethan thought about all the days she had shown up. The difficult mornings. The endless therapy sessions. The stormy night when she sat beside him for hours. She had never asked for recognition. Never mentioned the scholarship. Never tried to make him feel indebted. She simply stayed. The realization humbled him in a way success never had. Later that afternoon they arrived at the rehabilitation gym. Large windows overlooked the East River, now shimmering beneath a pale winter sun. Patients worked quietly with therapists. Conversations mixed with the steady sounds of equipment and encouragement. Ethan's therapist, Marcus Reynolds, approached holding a clipboard. I think it is time. Ethan immediately knew what he meant. For weeks he had been preparing for this moment. The parallel bars stood 20 feet away. Cold metal. Endless effort. Possibility. Fear. Marcus positioned the wheelchair near the bars. Olivia stood nearby but said nothing. Ethan placed both hands on the rails. The gym suddenly felt very still. Every setback. Every difficult day. Every disappointment seemed to gather around him at once. His muscles tightened. Doubt whispered familiar words. What if you fail? What if nothing has changed? Ethan lowered his head. For a brief moment the old hopelessness returned. Then Olivia spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for him to hear. Do you remember what you told me about your company? Ethan glanced toward her. Which part? The part where you said every breakthrough came after hundreds of failed attempts. Ethan almost laughed. That sounds like something I would say. It does. Olivia smiled. So stop demanding perfection from yourself on the first try. Around them the gym continued moving. Patients exercised. Therapists encouraged. Life carried on. Ethan took a slow breath. Then another. He tightened his grip on the rails and pushed upward. The effort was immediate. Difficult. Uncertain. Yet something felt different. Stronger. For the first time in months he was not focused on what he had lost. He was focused on what remained. His shoulders steadied. His balance improved. Slowly, inch by inch, he rose higher. Marcus watched carefully. Olivia held her breath. Ethan's legs trembled beneath him. But they held. 1 second. 2. 3. The room blurred slightly. Not from weakness. From emotion. Months ago he believed his life had ended. Now he stood beneath his own strength. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But undeniably. Standing. Applause erupted from somewhere across the gym. Then another voice joined in. Then another. Ethan barely heard any of it. His eyes remained fixed on Olivia. She was smiling through tears she was trying unsuccessfully to hide. For years Ethan believed success meant stock prices, headlines, and billion-dollar deals. Yet none of those victories had ever felt like this. A few moments later he lowered himself back into the wheelchair. Breathing hard. Exhausted. Grateful. Marcus patted his shoulder. The therapist celebrated. Patients smiled. But Ethan only looked at Olivia. You were right, he said quietly. Olivia tilted her head. About what? Ethan glanced toward the snowy city beyond the windows. The injury changed part of my life. His eyes returned to hers. It did not erase me. 1 year later the ballroom overlooking Central Park glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and soft, golden light. Snow drifted gently beyond the towering windows while hundreds of guests filled the room. Business leaders. Doctors. Journalists. Patients. Families. People from every corner of the city had gathered for the same reason. At the front of the ballroom stood a large display featuring photographs and stories from the Ethan Blackwood and Olivia Carter Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting patients recovering from life-changing injuries and helping families facing the same struggles Olivia's family once endured. The foundation had already funded rehabilitation programs in 12 states, awarded dozens of nursing scholarships, and provided assistance to thousands of families. A year earlier, Ethan would never have imagined standing in a room like this. Not because of the crowd. Not because of the attention. Because a year earlier he could not imagine having a future worth planning. A soft round of applause echoed through the ballroom as the evening's host stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ethan Blackwood. The applause grew louder. Ethan rose from his seat. He still used a cane for longer distances, but every step forward belonged to him. No wheelchair. No hospital room. No isolation. Just progress. The journey had not been easy. Recovery rarely was. But he had learned something important. Moving forward did not require perfection. It only required refusing to quit. Ethan reached the stage and looked out across the room. For a moment he said, "Nothing." The crowd gradually grew quiet. Beyond the audience, near the side of the ballroom, he spotted Olivia. She stood beside several nurses from Blackwood Medical Center, completely unaware that she was about to become the focus of the evening. Ethan smiled. "A year ago," he began, "I believed my life was over." The room remained silent. "I had lost my confidence. I had lost my direction. I spent months convincing myself that everyone eventually leaves." He paused. The strange thing is that I was almost right. A few guests exchanged curious glances. Ethan continued. Many people did leave. Some left because they were afraid. Some left because life moved on. Some left because they only loved the version of me that was successful and easy to admire. His eyes moved toward Olivia. But one person stayed. Heads turned throughout the ballroom. Olivia looked startled. Ethan smiled again. She never asked for recognition. She never asked for credit. She never even told me that our lives had crossed paths years before. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. The audience listened carefully. 12 years ago, a scholarship changed the future of a young woman and her family. I barely remembered approving it. To me, it was one file among thousands. To her family, it changed everything. Ethan looked directly at Olivia. A year ago, that same young woman walked into a hospital room and refused to leave when it would have been easier to walk away. The ballroom erupted into applause. Olivia lowered her head, visibly overwhelmed. Ethan waited for the applause to settle before speaking again. People often asked me what saved my life. He glanced around the room. The answer was not money. It was not success. It was not determination. His voice softened. It was kindness. Silence returned. Warm. Respectful. Meaningful. Ethan looked toward the foundation display near the entrance where an old photograph showed a younger Olivia standing beside her father. Nearby sat another item protected inside a glass case. A silver watch. The same watch that had quietly